Oh baby, what's going on everybody? Thank you for clicking on the video. Today we're going to be talking about wide receivers in Dynasty. And when looking at wide receivers to trade for in Dynasty, really it comes down to how much value can I get and how cheap can I get it. And the most productive wide receivers in fantasy football command the greatest target shares, are at the top of the league in metrics like air yards, yards per route run, and yards and touchdowns and receptions. I mean, that's how you score fantasy points, obviously. We all know this, but how can we extract wide receivers out of the pool that are undervalued? And if so, how do we go about doing that? Well, in this video, I'm going to identify 7 players that I believe you could trade for right now, and I'll explain exactly why I believe that they are underrated, and that starts right now. We are going to agitate the ageist in Dynasty right off the bat by nominating Courtland Sutton as our first wide receiver on this Dynasty buys list. Courtland Sutton's most productive season he's ever had came this year. He finishes the wide receiver 14 overall, the wide receiver 24 in fantasy points per game. Sutton also finished number 22 in target share, 25.1%, number 2 in air yards, and that's a big deal because 859 of those air yards were unrealized, which ranked number 3 amongst wide receivers, and he finished number 10 overall in expected fantasy points per game. So he really should have finished closer to a wide receiver 1 than the wide receiver 2 that he finished at. We also know that Sutton is tied to Bo Nix and Sean Payton for the 2025 season. Payton is a proven head coach in New Orleans, who comes from New Orleans, and his system produced many thousand-yard receivers. Marquise Colston, Michael Thomas are receivers who are similar in style to Courtland Sutton. Not completely similar, but very similar in body type and the way they play. Currently, Courtland Sutton is ranked as the player number 102, wide receiver 40 overall, according to Keep Trade Cuts Dynasty Superflex rankings. That would put Sutton in a similar range to Alvin Kamara, Tucker Kraft, Mark Andrews, Michael Pittman, Tank Dell, David Njoku, or if we're talking in terms of rookie draft value, a 2025 mid-second round rookie pick. If I'm a win-now team, I'd be interested in seeing if I can trade a 2025 mid to late second round pick for Courtland Sutton once we get closer to rookie draft season to strengthen my team, but really only if I'm a win-now team, because I do realize that Sutton is on the older end, especially he's past the age apex at wide receiver, but his situation and his opportunity, I mean, looking at the Broncos depth chart, it's going to be good next season too. I'm not sure Jameson Williams is ever going to be an elite fantasy asset, but he is an extremely fun player to watch playing in an offense that utilizes his talents very well. This season, Williams finishes the wide receiver 22 overall and the wide receiver 23 in fantasy points per game. That's 14.2 fantasy points per game scored. And if you look at the target share, which I will admit is lower than we like, it's number 51 amongst wide receivers at 18.9%. Williams does make the most out of the targets that he gets. Williams ranked number 12 amongst wide receivers in yards after the catch, number 6 in yards per reception, and number 11 in target separation, while ranking number 22 amongst wide receivers in yards per route run. That means he gets open, and he gets open deep down the field. His quarterback, Jared Goff, doesn't necessarily take deep shots, doesn't necessarily throw the ball deep down the field a lot. Goff ranked number 22 amongst quarterbacks in deep ball attempts, but he does throw the ball far down the field on average. Goff ranked number 2 amongst quarterbacks in yards per attempt this season, and he's very accurate with the football. Additionally, Williams is just 23 years old. Sure, Ben Johnson might be leaving for a head coaching job, but the Detroit Lions offensive coordinator job should be a coveted gig in the NFL. I trust Dan Campbell and company to find the right guy to replace Johnson. Therefore, I feel good about the Lions offense, and I feel good about Williams' place in that offense going forward. And currently, Jameson Williams is ranked as the player number 63 overall and the wide receiver 23 overall, according to Keep Trade Cut. And to be honest, that's a little bit high, but it's not stopping me from targeting Jameson Williams in trade. For example, I probably wouldn't trade Chris Olave or Xavier Worthy to get him, which are 2 players that are ranked very closely to him on Keep Trade Cut. But if I could flip a DJ Moore, a Brandon Ayuk, or a Keon Coleman, for Jameson Williams, I think I'd take that deal, especially in best ball leagues. Rome Odunze might be my favorite wide receiver to buy this offseason. This is because the Bears were an absolute dumpster fire this season. A lot of the other rookie wide receivers had success. Brian Thomas Jr. is the talk of every Dynasty league. Malik Neighbors, Ladd McConkey. We all know these names, but those who drafted Rome Odunze ahead of Thomas Jr. and McConkey are probably pretty jaded right now. It's time to take advantage of this because things could have gone much differently for Odunze in 2024. Odunze finished the 2024 season as the wide receiver 49 and the wide receiver 59 in fantasy points per game. That's 8.5 fantasy points per game. Ouch. However, Odunze flashed at times in week 3. He scored 23.4 fantasy points, wide receiver 3 overall in the week, and in week 14, he scored 20.2 fantasy points, wide receiver 13 overall that week. Odunze also ranked number 11 amongst wide receivers in air yards and number 35 in expected fantasy points per game, which is far higher than his actual finish. Those two metrics point to another bleak metric, which could explain the reason for the horrid season altogether. Odunze ranked number 99 amongst wide receivers in catchable target rate, which tells us that Caleb Williams was pretty darn inaccurate when targeting Rome Odunze. So why is there still reason for optimism? The first is I have to believe Caleb Williams is going to be better than he showed in 2024. Williams endured a mid-season coaching change that resulted in him having three offensive coordinators in his first NFL season. None of the other rookie quarterbacks had to endure that level of chaos. Secondly, the Bears are likely going to seek out an offensive coach, maybe Ben Johnson, who can get the most out of the Bears offense. And lastly, Keenan Allen's not going to be back in 2025. I would almost guarantee it, but it's the Bears and who knows what they're going to do. Currently, Odunze is ranked as the player number 52 according to Keep Trade Cut. This puts him in a similar range to players like Zay Flowers, Josh Jacobs, George Pickens, Jared Goff, and Chase Brown. And to be honest, I think I feel comfortable trading any of those players minus Jared Goff for Rome Odunze, but I'd prefer to trade a player like Chris Olave or Jaden Waddle to get Odunze on my Dynasty team. Sometimes in Dynasty, there is some real value to be gained by leaning into uncertainty. And on the surface, the 49ers wide receiver room appears to be crowded, with Brandon Ayuk and Christian McCaffrey returning from injury and Juwan Jennings under contract for 2025. It's very possible that Ricky Pearsall serves more of a backup role again in 2025. However, Deebo Samuel was dreadful to end the season. Since week 11, the last 7 weeks of the season, Samuel finished with double-digit fantasy points just one time. That was week 16, and to be fair, he did finish as the wide receiver 5 overall that week with 25.1 fantasy points. Ricky Pearsall did flash at times throughout the season. 17.3 fantasy points in week 10, 28.7 fantasy points in week 17. It's unfortunate that Pearsall didn't get on the field sooner because of the injury, a gunshot. But we do know that the 49ers are going to have to make some tough decisions coming up because Brock Purdy is now eligible for a contract extension, and some of their stars are getting older. Deebo Samuel's one of those stars. There were rumors surrounding Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk being available for trade during the offseason and even leading into the regular season. Jennings is only under contract for one more season, and we know McCaffrey's been dealing with a lingering calf leg injury. As I mentioned at the top, there's a lot of uncertainty surrounding the 49ers, but there isn't any uncertainty surrounding Ricky Pearsall, who was drafted in the first round in 2024 and is going to be under contract through 2027 with a club option for 2028 because he was drafted in the first round. Currently, Pearsall is player number 100 on Keep Trade Cut's Dynasty Superflex rankings, wide receiver 39 overall. That puts him near Michael Pittman, Alvin Kamara, Courtland Sutton, Khalil Shakir, according to Keep Trade Cut's rankings. It also puts him close in value to a 2025 mid-second round rookie pick, and I would see if I could trade a mid to late second round rookie pick to acquire Pearsall. Maybe look down the list a little bit on Keep Trade Cut as an example of a trade to make for Ricky Pearsall, but he's definitely somebody I'm interested in. Before Rashid Shaheed suffered an injury, he was on just a rapid pace in fantasy football. During the first 5 weeks of the season, Shaheed finished all but one of those weeks with at least 16 fantasy points. Clearly, the Saints figured out how to unlock him as a deep play threat. In fact, Shaheed finished as number 1 overall amongst wide receivers in air yard share, 50.3%. That's incredible. Number 4 in average depth of target, and number 35 amongst wide receivers in deep targets. Makes sense. Even though he played in just 6 games. Maybe that doesn't make sense. How can you rank number 35 amongst wide receivers in deep targets when you've only played in just 6 games? The Saints are going to have a new head coach in 2025, but the quarterback's likely going to remain the same, meaning there should be some continuity amongst Derek Carr and the wide receivers, including Shaheed, who's going to be under contract in 2025. Currently, Shaheed is the player number 137 overall and the wide receiver 52 overall. That puts him right next to Romeo Doubs and Jake Ferguson, according to Keep Trade Cut. I would have no problem trading either one of these players for Rashid Shaheed. There's also a world where Shaheed is an afterthought as we get closer to rookie drafts, and an early third-round pick gets the job done in a trade. Calvin Ridley signed a 4-year, $92 million deal in the 2024 offseason to be the primary wide receiver in Tennessee. And on the surface, it would appear as though Ridley had a rather disappointing fantasy season. He finishes the wide receiver 28 overall, wide receiver 36 in fantasy points per game. However, it's undeniable that Ridley had to suffer through some of the worst quarterback play of any wide receiver in football. Ridley ranked number 97 amongst wide receivers in catchable target rate. There are some other metrics that would point to Ridley, the fact that he should have had a much better 2024 season. Number 1 being that he ranked number 1, yes, number 1 amongst wide receivers in air yards. As you might guess, Ridley also ranked number 1 amongst wide receivers in unrealized air yards. Those two stats suggest that there could have been a lot more production for Calvin Ridley if he saw more catchable targets downfield. Ridley is going to be either the top receiving option in Tennessee next season or one of the top options. And this isn't necessarily a deep free agent class or NFL draft class at the wide receiver position either. The Titans have also secured the number 1 overall pick. This likely means that Ridley is going to be playing with either Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward next season. Either one of those options has a lot more upside than either Will Levis or Mason Rudolph had this season. Ridley is 30 years old, so there is a chance that father time catches up to him. But for win now teams, there's a lot of value in adding Calvin Ridley this offseason, and currently he's ranked as the player number 157 according to Keep Trade Cut, wide receiver 56 overall. He is closely ranked to players like Jalen Coker, Christian Watson, Cedric Tillman, Jalen Wright, and Rashad Bateman. And in terms of rookie draft capital, he's being valued close to a 2027 mid-second round pick. My guess is he's probably going to be available for a late second, early third round pick in 2025. Rookie pick, that is. Let's end with a fun one. Marquise Brown was signed by the Chiefs in the offseason to be one of the primary options in their offense. The problem was he missed most of the season with a shoulder injury, and since returning, the Chiefs have very clearly eased him back into a regular role in the offense. And while he didn't necessarily score fantasy points, Brown did command targets. In Week 17, the Chiefs targeted Brown 8 times, and in Week 17, Brown was targeted 7 times. Marquise Brown will be an interesting case study. Can a 27-year-old wide receiver coming off an upper body injury return to form in 2025? Well, a lot will depend on what team he's playing for because he's going to be a free agent. But here's what I do like about Marquise Brown's situation. The injury wasn't to his knee or to his foot. It was a shoulder injury. Brown also doesn't have a terrible injury history either. There haven't been any torn ACLs or Achilles injuries on his record. There's also a strong likelihood, barring a playoff breakout, that Brown actually returns to the Chiefs on a team-friendly deal. This would leave Brown, Rashee Rice, Xavier Worthy as the team's top 3 wideouts, and if that happens, then Brown would be an absolute steal at his current value for Dynasty in 2025. The problem, of course, is we don't know any of this for certain. The best we can do is look into the tea leaves to project what his situation may look like, but the best part of all of this is the price of acquiring Marquise Hollywood Brown in Dynasty. Currently, he's ranked as player number 169 overall, wide receiver 64. He's ranked near Amari Cooper, Cole Kmet, Wan'Dale Robinson. I would very easily trade any of those players for Marquise Brown right now in Dynasty. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment if you got a question, if you liked what you saw, if you didn't like what you saw. I'll take any kind of comment you want to leave. leave it in the comments section. And until next time, be good, everybody, and we will see you later.